The Independent Budget Office has estimated that if these cuts go into effect, 8.6 million Americans will lose their health care.
All right, you want to move on to our next topic, which is the GOP spending bill.
Yeah, or, more of a tax bill.
Tax bills, but yeah,
than spending bill.
Frame it.
It's a pretty simple bottom line.
Okay, tell it to me then, man.
Yeah. It contains enormous tax breaks.
For who?
Overwhelmingly to the wealthy. That's inevitable when you cut back on income taxes because poor people don't pay income taxes, right?
Well, not to the same degree.
Poor people don't pay at all. Poor people.
Oh, poor people.
And middle-class people pay to some degree.
Yeah.
But what do poor people and middle-class people mostly pay to the federal government? Not personal income tax.
Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid.
Payroll taxes.
Payroll taxes, right.
Which get deducted from their paycheck and you can't get back. That's what most people pay.
Right.
Not the rich. It's a tiny fraction of what the rich pay, particularly since these payroll taxes are capped. So the very rich, are paying a minuscule fraction of their income. I read an independent analysis which said 30%, a third, of the tax cuts are going to the top 1%, not the top 10 or 5.
What?
And the big corporations. Top 1% and the big corporations.
Right.
And the majority of it is going to the wealthier Americans with minimal amounts for the middle class and nothing, essentially, for poor Americans. Not only that, independent analyses have said this is going to drill a huge hole in the deficit.
No, Republicans are the ones that are supposed to save us from the deficit.
Yeah, I remember Trump saying, I'm gonna bring down the deficit. Yeah. I'm going to bring down it fast. Maybe as fast as I'm going to end the Ukraine-Russian war.
I've been hearing Republicans saying my whole life they're going to end the deficit.
They've been saying this since the days of Calvin Coolidge, who you probably don't remember.
I don't remember.
But was president in the 1920s.
A good thing I don't remember.
Yeah, they've been saying this for 100 years, at least 100 years in modern American history. They've even proposed balanced budget amendments, even though they knew they had zero chance of passing.
I have a Washington Post article that says the GOP tax bill is on track to add more than $2.5 trillion to the U.S. deficit.
And that assumes they'll make all the spending cuts.
Right.
And that's the low end of the estimate. It's anywhere from 2.5 to 4, not billion, trillion dollars added to the deficit to benefit those who don't need it. And while they're benefiting those who don't need it, who are they hurting?
Your average American.
Or poor and vulnerable Americans. What are they cutting? Medicaid
right.
and food stamps. The Independent Budget Office has estimated that if these cuts go into effect, 8.6 million Americans will lose their health care. Think about that.
But I thought
and that doesn't even count the health problems of losing your food stamps.
But I thought all they're doing is rooting out all the fraud and waste within these programs. Is that true?
Fraud and waste is like election fraud or DEI.
Right.
It's a buzzword.
Right.
It's meaningless. There's almost no fraud and waste in these programs. It's a minuscule percent. Have they identified any in this bill?
I know, you tell me.
I haven't seen it.
Why aren't they ever concerned about the fraud and waste that is done by rich people or corporations? Why don't they investigate that?
That's the biggest fraud and waste.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
Remember, and I know I'm repeating this, but it's such an astounding figure. Since 1989, so about 35 years, over $13 trillion in wealth has been transferred from 99% of us, not 50% of us, 99% of us to the top 1%. With everything going on right now, we are glad that today's video is sponsored by Aura. We all remember how a group of young Dodge employees, propped up by a billionaire tech mogul, got access to Social Security's private databases. And just recently, the national security breach through a Signal group chat tells us that no one is looking out for your sensitive data except you. Hackers already stole billions of records from a national background check system. Full names, addresses, phone numbers, and even Social Security numbers dumped online for free. That kind of breach puts every American at risk. That's why I recommend Aura. Aura monitors the dark web, alerts you fast if your information shows up where it shouldn't, and backs it up with $5 million in identity theft insurance. You get real protection all in one app. Go to aura.com/Allan Lichtman to start your free 14-day trial and find out if your data's already been exposed. Again, that's aura.com/Allan Lichtman. In today's world, you can't afford to be passive. Protect yourself and your family.
I feel like I'm living in Groundhog's Day. It's like, why are these rural Americans, middle Americans, why do they keep getting up every election and voting for these Republicans who show time and time again they are not acting in their interest? I don't like, how many times do they have to give tax cuts to the rich? How many times do they have to threaten or actually cut Medicare? Like, how many times do they have to do this before rural America goes, wait a second?
Oh, come on. That is of no consequence when compared with banning gay pride parades. Come on. What's more important?
I just can't wrap my mind.
They agitate on these social and cultural issues which resonate with people.
But that seems ridiculous. Like, so you're from, a rural county of Wisconsin, and you're getting up and you're voting based off of gay pride parades? I mean, come on.
I'm using that as an illustration.
I know, but my point is...
But you're voting on these social issues, the gays and the lesbians and the transgenders. The deranged liberals are destroying the fiber of our country.
I know,
what could be more important?
What are they going to just look at what's happening and say, wait a second, these Republicans are not fiscally conservative. They're raising our deficit. They're not benefiting anybody except for the rich and the corporations. They are not out to support me, so I need to stop voting for them. When is that going to happen?
Grab my book. It's right behind you. It's all in my book. I go through this entire analysis. Conservative at the core, a new history of American conservatism. I examine all of these issues, Sam, that you've raised and explain how they've evolved and developed over the last 100 years.
So you're saying this isn't new?
This is nothing new.
So it's even crazier than I'm saying. I'm just thinking about the last 15 years.
Nothing new. And I explain how Trump, contrary to what some old conservatives like Bill Kristol and George Will have said, did not hijack or betray conservatism. He is the logical culmination of 100 years of conservative history, going all the way back to the abortion issue of 1919, 1920, prohibition. Now we have prohibition on abortion. Then they had prohibition on the sale and manufacture of alcohol. And then they also had big tax cuts for the rich, big deregulation, criminalization of so-called deviant sexual behavior. Virtually any issue that's agitated today, except for some foreign policy issues, which are more nuanced, has its origin in the years immediately following World War I. This also shows that American conservatism was not a reaction to the growth of the liberal state, which is mainly due to Franklin Roosevelt. The American conservative movement, the modern one, developed right after World War I in all those ways I've described, a decade before or more the administration of FDR.
I have a theory, and let me know what you think about it. It's more of a psychological theory than it is a political theory. So, I heard this stat the other day that 44% of Americans think they can achieve billionaire status, and 6 in 10 strive to be, quote, mega wealthy. Do you think it's this weird psychological thing with Americans where we're told we can become as rich as humanly possible, we're told we can become billionaires, so these voters are getting up voting explicitly against their interests in this weird psychological game where they think eventually they'll be a billionaire and it'll help them?
There's a lot of evidence to say you're exactly right, Sam. You know, this famous quote, I think it's from Will Rogers, back in the 1920s, when he says, you know, poor Americans never got anywhere under Calvin Coolidge, never got anywhere under his successor, Warren Harding. Now we're electing Herbert Hoover, and they all expect to be millionaires under Hoover. This is, again, nothing new. This idea that, you know, if we keep everything open, you too can be a Donald Trump. Jeff Bezos, right?
Bezos.
So you get that right. Absolutely, that is a big part of it. Another element is something I talk about extensively in my book, and that is the great paradox of American politics. On the one hand, you know, really beginning with FDR to the present, people expect their benefits from government, right? If you're an old Republican, are you going to give up your Social Security?
No.
No, of course not. If you're hit by a hurricane, are you going to say, we don't want FEMA to come in here and give us money?
No.
No, of course not. Everybody wants, regardless of your politics or ideology, you all want the benefits of government. But on the other hand, you hate your government.
Right.
Right? You think it's a swamp, it's inefficient, it's corrupt, it's elite. You think it destroys rugged individualism. And so this is kind of the paradox around which American politics has really centered for nearly 100 years.
I've been watching Seinfeld recently, and in one of his opening monologues, I forgot which episode it is, but he talks about how government are parents for adults. And that's how most adults, you know, it's kind of a necessary, you need parents, but also, like, you know, they're a pain in the ass.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
that's exactly right. Before we get to questions, a couple of other things I want to talk about.
Yes.
Do you know what they snuck in to this bill?
Yes.
That had to do with guns?
Yes, because you already told me. But
they snuck in, and, you know, this is huge, you know, hundreds of page bill. They snuck in a special break for, get this, not just the manufacturers of guns, but the manufacturers of silencers get a special tax break in this bill that will cost us $1.5 billion. You know, we can't help people who need medical care or kids, but we can certainly help assassins and gang members and criminals who use silencers.
Yeah, even for simple self-defense, why would you need a silencer?
Nobody uses a silencer for self-defense because it makes the guns less accurate.
Right.
It's obviously not used for target practice or hunting or collecting. It's only used for kind of concealed murders.
Why is it
or
in
assaults.
there? Why is it in there? It's just some big gun lobby.
Yeah, the gun lobby. They're enthralled to the gun. But this, you know, it's a small thing. But it should outrage every American. And it gives you just an inkling of just how corrupt what is going on with this bill really is. How can you even, in any universe, think about aiding the manufacturers of silencers while you're taking health care away from our kids?